Hello, I'm Hushi, and today, as I used to do, I'm speaking extemporaneously, and I don't have a script or an essay written and composed, but I thought I would talk to you about something that used to be a huge part of my life, and something which I always feel so strongly going back to, and that is Doctor Who, the original series from 1963. I grew up with it. My favorite Doctor was the Third Doctor. I got to meet him. He was my hero. He was always my hero. My hero to this day, in fact. And I thought I would talk about some of the episodes that I had watched, the episodes and serials and so forth, and tell you my thoughts on them and the experiences around them. So I hope you get something interesting out of this. I hope you like what I tell you. But today I am talking about Resurrection of the Daleks, also known as the one time the Fifth Doctor got to fight the Daleks. And it's on the heels of what is probably my favorite story with the Fifth Doctor, which is Frontios, which I'm sure I will talk about in future after I watch it again, because it is absolutely the Fifth Doctor at his peak. That is, in my opinion, the one serial that shows the best of the Fifth Doctor and the best of the companions, Tegan and Turlough, at the time. My favorite companion of the Fifth Doctor was actually Nyssa, and funny enough, I've actually named a character sort of after her. But he's very different than she is, obviously. But I always loved Nyssa. But I adored Tegan because, well, she was exactly what the Fifth Doctor needed, because he was kind of an asshole. Like, the whole time. And she needed to remind him that he kind of fucked up sometimes. Like, he wasn't as great as he obviously thought he was. But she was also very self-deprecating. Like, she once referred to herself as just a mouth on legs, which I thought was hilarious. She was very likable, and it had a kind of a familial sense, with Tegan being the mum and, you know, the Doctor being sort of the young but very ill-tempered dad. And then you had the kids around. But it really wasn't, it didn't go out of its way. Unlike the new series, the reimagined series, as I will call it, it didn't go out of its way to make like a family dynamic. It just sort of settled in that way when you're a young viewer and you're watching it and you're like, okay, I can get that. I can access this. I can engage with this. But Turlough was also great. I always loved him. I always like the male companions, especially since they do seem to kind of challenge the assumptions of the dynamic, especially at the time. And Turlough was one of those companions that was very difficult to figure out. Like, you couldn't tell what he was going to do next, which was very interesting, and he was also very knowledgeable. One of the things that I really loved the most about, like, Romana and onward with the Doctor's companions is that so many of them were not from Earth, and it gave it a good contrast with the ones that were, but it also reminded us that the Doctor was not from Earth, which is something that people tend to forget, and he didn't always just travel with people from Earth. One of the big things that annoys me about the reimagining is that so many of the companions are just Earth people from the modern period of time, and it's annoying to me because there's so much more. Even if they are completely just like Earth humanoids in appearance, it's much more interesting to have a background of, say, a planet called Traken, where the Doctor went for an adventure and then one of the inhabitants came with him. It's much more interesting to have a companion like Turlough, for example, because he is very knowledgeable, like highly knowledgeable, advanced knowledge, and he's an alien, so he also has a lot of different ways of engaging with people and the people that they meet, and I think that's a great detail. The same is true of, like, Nyssa, who at one point references being extremely old, and the Doctor corroborates her statement. I forget when that was. I think that was in Arc of Infinity or something like that, because they actually got some time to develop that. But anyway, you know, inevitably I'll watch it at some point, and if I'm still doing these, I'll address it. But Resurrection of the Daleks. I was very fond of the cast, especially the regular cast, and people were doing their absolute best. It was in the period of John Nathan Turner doing his making them like a comic book and doing these sensationalistic bullshit things. One of the things that was a sensationalistic bullshit thing was, because they wanted to do all the episodes in the following season as 45-minute episodes, they introduced that during Resurrection of the Daleks, and I am 100% sure that this was in the intention to get people favorably inclined to that format by returning the Daleks for the first time in, God, let's see. So Destiny of the Daleks was in 1979, and Resurrection of the Daleks was in 1984, so that makes it about 5 years. So it had been half a decade since the Daleks had really been on the screen, aside from the Five Doctors, which doesn't really count because it wasn't a Dalek story. The Daleks were just a Dalek was involved in it. In any case, the 45-minute episode length is not good, and it was sort of proven as not good the subsequent season, and that's why the reimagining series really doesn't do a good job, I feel, with pacing, because the format doesn't work very well for pacing. Like, even with Resurrection of the Daleks, you can tell that they had it split into 4 episodes in the script, but they just sort of blended them together in 2 lump episodes, which led to kind of a disappointing series of events that had to sort of lead up to a cliffhanger. The 45-minute episodes were kind of not very good because it's very hard to do pacing well when you have 45 minutes and you work up to a cliffhanger. And I thought it was fine, but I don't think that it is the right thing for a format of a show like Doctor Who. The cliffhangers are something that added a great deal to the story and added a lot of tension and suspense. One of the things that I loved about Doctor Who was that the cliffhangers would keep you watching. Every episode, a cliffhanger, it would keep you watching till the next one, and most of the time, by the time I had started watching, they didn't do the things that they tended to do in the first and second Doctors, some of them anyway, which was to lead into the next story. Personally, I think it's a better option to have the adventures mostly self-contained. I say that, even though I will say there are exceptions that work really well, like Frontiers, for example, which leads directly into Resurrection of the Daleks, with the TARDIS getting caught in the time corridor. And the Doctor and his companions are piloting the TARDIS down the time corridor, while these people all around Shad Thames are having all these crises. You see these people escaping from the Dalek troopers, you see people on a spaceship, a prison ship in the future, and you see these people at the warehouses where the people on the ship are coming out and where the Daleks have left these canisters of the Mavellan virus, which was a nice reference back to Destiny of the Daleks, because they were fighting with the Mavellans and apparently losing quite considerably. And I liked the Mavellans. I liked the fact that here were enemies that could actually fight against the Daleks and win, which is something that a lot of the stories forgot after Resurrection of the Daleks. So it was very nice to have enemies other than just other Daleks fighting the Daleks and doing fairly well. They really hadn't done that since, like, the Mechanoids, and they only appeared once. And then they got referred to in, like, comics and stuff, but on TV they only appeared once, so it was nice to see an enemy of the Daleks that could give as good as they got, in fact better. But of course they don't appear in Resurrection of the Daleks, and the Doctor takes a while to get involved. He doesn't know that the Daleks are there until a Dalek actually transmats down into the warehouse, and that's actually the cliffhanger for the first episode. The Daleks are kept fairly outside of the story until that point, which they only start appearing near the end of what would be the first 25-minute episode, which is another reason why I think it should have just been 25-minute episodes, because the cliffhangers with that actually work a lot better. And even the kind of, I wouldn't say it's a bad cliffhanger, but I would say it's kind of an odd cliffhanger. But the third episode ends with Davros giving a very chilling speech, and a very impassioned one. You remember him from Destiny of the Daleks, but you also remember him moreover from Genesis of the Daleks as like this, well, the Nazi parallels are very obvious from that serial, but it's terrifying too, because Davros has a new mask. He has a new face and look, and he's just absolutely terrifying, utterly appalling. It looks like his face melts. Davros is, as usual, just horrible, and that was a neat cliffhanger. Of course, we lose it in the 45-minute episode format, so I still, even for this one, I still prefer the 25-minute with cliffhangers, and I have to say that it didn't really free up the writing in the next season for doing anything really novel or different. I don't know why they decided to go to 45-minute format, because as I've said with a lot of different shows, usually the 45 minutes, which I call a TV hour, most shows don't have enough going on to fill that time and to fill it with a pacing that works. This one worked primarily because they wrote it as a 4-episode, hour and 40 minutes thing. So it worked as that. But on that same note, when they write it as a TV hour instead, it's very different. Like, you get an entirely different feel from a lot of the shows that were written as 45-minute episodes. Like the very next season, season 22, has a very different feel to it. And some of the stories I feel that don't work so well in that format would have probably worked better as individual 30-minute episodes. But I digress. Resurrection of the Daleks was written by Eric Sayward, whom I absolutely despise as a writer. Like, he was fucking awful. He was also a script editor, and he just represents a period of Doctor Who where sensationalistic bullshit and hyper-elevated body counts and violence come together for really unsatisfying viewing. The Doctor is always the worst when Sayward is writing. And Sayward, in this story especially, is just absolutely bloodthirsty. He's the same. He reminds me a lot of Joss Whedon, in fact, in that he just doesn't seem to respect his audience or the characters enough for anyone to really invest in any of the characters. And indeed, in Resurrection of the Daleks, it's a huge mistake, because nobody survives except for Lytton and the Doctor and his companions. And Lytton is one of those characters that actually recurred later in Attack of the Cybermen, which was fucking awful. But Lytton was not particularly sympathetic or likable. Like, he was well played. The actor is fantastic who plays it. He was played by Maurice Colborne, who was just brilliant with not very good material, I have to say. And Sayward was correct. I will agree with him on the fact that he said he had too many plots going on that he did not work to resolve to his satisfaction. And indeed, there is a lot of problem with too much plot going on, with none of it really dealt with in a satisfying way, and nobody really gets to do much of anything. It's the same problem that Earthshock had. A high body count, not a lot of things for people to do, really boring in parts. Like, at least Resurrection of the Daleks is not as boring and eventless as Earthshock, and it's not quite as stupid as Earthshock, but it still has really stupid moments. That said, it is one of those stories that will really draw you into it. You will find yourself being really involved and invested, because this is one of those times where the stakes are legitimately high, but not all of them make sense to be. Like, the whole Daleks being aware of the Time Lords and deciding that they're going to send Dalek duplicates of the Doctor and his companions to assassinate the High Council on Gallifrey, that was really extra. Like, it's totally not needed, and the first few times that I had seen it, I completely forgot about that subplot. Indeed, the subplot goes nowhere, because it only serves to protect the Doctor and Turlough and Tegan to some extent, but then the Doctor just destroys anything that they have to put in those Dalek duplicates, and it can't work. Like, Russell Davies was trying to pretend like it had something to do with his stupid continuation, but it was very explicitly nipped in the bud by the Doctor destroying any information they got from him. Regardless, that was a dumb, extraneous plot thread. The rest of the plot is actually pretty compelling. Like, the people on board the space station, that was frustrating because pretty much none of them actually meets the Doctor, which is kind of shitty. Rula Lenska really is exceptional as Styles, the Doctor aboard the ship. She's fantastic, and she's wasted in this role because she barely gets to do anything, as I've said. And as I've said too, the fact that she doesn't ever meet the Doctor is really, really infuriating to me. Like, the plots just never come together. Also, one small problem: most of the effects were fine, but it seems like more emphasis, time and trouble was put into grotesque effects that were just going to be controversial or not able to be shown on television, or people would complain about them, and indeed they don't really serve a great purpose. It's just gross or violent, or it's also really like the guns that the crew have on the ship are awful. They don't even have a beam. And in one of the versions of the episodes that was given to some PBS stations in America, in the second episode they didn't have the effects. So you would just see these little, obviously sort of plasticky, cheap guns. The end would light up and then people would just go, "Ah!" So it was kind of unintentionally comical. But it happens. It's TV. It's the BBC. So I don't usually like to focus on effects gone wrong. And most of the effects in Resurrection of the Daleks are perfect. They are just fine. They look fine. But those guns, the Dalek troopers' hats, various things, just like little things adding up to really distracting stuff. Like at one point, Rula Lenska's character is saying they need to get out of there, and she gestures with her gun, but it's so light and cheap that she ends up firing her gun because it lights up at the end for a moment, and you know it's just like you squeeze the trigger and it lights up, which is neat and simple, but it also means that she just blasted the ceiling and nothing was done of it. And those are obviously really easy to fire accidentally, which makes them very, very unsafe if you think about it in terms of the universe, which I guess sort of fits that spacecraft, because everything was shitty there and cheap. And the military people in the warehouse are interesting and pretty much well developed for their 5 minutes on screen, but especially Laird, the doctor, the scientist with them. She's played really well, and she has moments with Tegan that are genuinely good. But like everybody else, she's completely wasted and nothing comes of it. Nothing comes of so much in this particular story that it's very understandable that Tegan would leave. But it's also not a very good story because it doesn't give Tegan any time to do anything. Basically, all she does is get sidelined early on. Then later in the story, she pops back up again, kind of gives the doctor a piece of her mind about what he's doing, but it's like her heart isn't in it because she has had nothing to do in the whole story. She has no context and does not understand why the doctor is willing to kill Davros, and just all in all, she gets treated like crap the whole time. Like, Turlo gets to do more than she does, which is nice. Like, I'm glad to see Turlo actually have the opportunity to do things, because usually he doesn't get to do things. Tegan, however, doesn't get to do hardly anything, which she should be doing since it's her last story with the Doctor. So when she leaves at the end, that's her moment. And I will say, that is one of the best moments of the Fifth Doctor. It is unfortunate because overall the story is not very likable. It's very hard to like when you look back on it. It's interesting as it's happening, and it's easy to get caught up in it and get in the moment, get swept up into the action, but afterwards it leaves you feeling hollow and depressed and disappointed because there's just too much going on and nothing is fleshed out to any decent level. And it's also very disappointing and depressing because so many characters just die, or they're just dispensed with in the most violent, unpleasant ways. And it really is excessive. It's excessive violence. It's excessive grotesquerie. It's very macabre. It's one of the most downbeat Doctor Who stories that I remember, and one of the most downbeat sci-fi things from the BBC or ITV or any British broadcasting at the time. And it gave Blake 7 a run for its money, like holy shit. But I will say that it is an episode that has a lot of personal meaning to me because it was one of the only stories that I did not have in any way growing up, because we had recorded a bunch of Doctor Who off of television, and most of the Fifth Doctor I didn't have. I had a few of the different stories, most in very bad states. I had to go to a fan gathering, a convention, and trade some stuff to get a copy of Resurrection of the Daleks. And it was rather snowy, it wasn't the best quality, but I sat there rapt, just completely invested in this story because I really wanted to see how the Fifth Doctor dealt with the Daleks. And it turned out it was not that well, actually. He doesn't really accomplish anything. He's almost like a passenger sort of swept up in the action himself. And even when he sets out, he's like, by damn, the Daleks are not going to be saved. I made a mistake. I didn't destroy the Daleks when they were being invented in Genesis of the Daleks. I let Davros go thinking that he'd be, in custody forever. And so the Doctor sets out to kill him and just ends up fucking that up completely, which is especially bad because if you look at the, like, you get caught up in the action, but then you start to think about it because Davros immediately greets him with like, yes, I will destroy everyone, the Daleks will be supreme, you should join me, Doctor. And the Doctor's like, well, it's like that line the second Doctor said in Tomb of the Cybermen where he was like, well, I thought you were crazy, I just wanted to make sure. This is one of those moments, and the second Doctor would have just been like, okay, well, fuck you. The fifth Doctor just has to talk it to death and really seems to want to believe that Davros is buying his own bullshit, because he keeps going on like when he sees the Doctor is there to kill him and the troops with him are actually his allies, he's like, oh no, I wanted to make the Daleks compassionate, I wanted to make them better. You can work with me, we could have armies of good Daleks. And it's like, who is believing this line of bullshit? It's Davros. He looks horrified, like more horrifying than ever, and he has obviously got something going on, like he's up to some shit. You know it. Just look at the motherfucker. Like, he's up to some shit. But that was a disappointing bit. And really, the Doctor doesn't accomplish anything against the Daleks, aside from getting rid of the Daleks on Earth and apparently ensuring that they wouldn't invade until, a couple of centuries later, I think. But he really doesn't do much of anything. Like, he does destroy the information they get from his brain, which is good, because then they can't mobilize their Dalek duplicates to destroy Gallifrey. Something to remember, Davies. Actually watch the episodes. Then you can maybe try and do a continuation of a series that apparently you didn't pay a lot of attention to. Turlough actually accomplishes a lot more by supporting the people on the space station, but it's also really sad because while he's, bebopping around, he's sort of taking the role that the Doctor should be doing. Whereas Tegan is left on Earth and she's sidelined for so long and can't really accomplish anything, and everywhere everyone tends to go is a dead end. Either their character is killed off, or they're just not able to accomplish anything. The Doctor and both of his companions barely interact in the story, which is another reason why I think it's accurate for Seward to say that he had too many plots going on, because he didn't resolve any of them particularly well. It was just like, this could have been a story with just Stein, and that's sad. You can imagine that if the Doctor hadn't been there, maybe Stein wouldn't have shaken his Dalek conditioning. But it's a very tenuous connection, and it's a very weak sort of thing to promote. More than not, the criticism is accurate of the Doctor that he allowed a lot of people to die who didn't really have to die. And part of that is that he didn't meet the people that were survivors of the station where Davros was being kept. He didn't kill Davros when he could. He didn't really defeat the Daleks, except indirectly and through someone else. And he didn't seem that concerned about that. Like, Stein was a Dalek duplicate, but he was a living person. The Dalek duplicates are actual people. Even though they replace people, they still have the person's mind in them, because that's how the Dalek duplicates work. That's how the Doctor was even able to get through to him. So his kind of casual, maybe it was Stein that blew up the station and blew up the Daleks too, it's just a bit callous. And you can really understand why Tegan, despite having very little contact with the Doctor during the story, chooses to leave by the end. But as I said before, the final moment where Tegan leaves the Doctor is basically an excellent summary of the John Nathan Turner, Eric Saward run on Doctor Who. It stopped being fun. And it's poignant because it's delivered in such a beautiful way by Janet Fielding, the actress. And one other thing that I must mention, the music, the soundtrack. Tegan has a recurring theme in Resurrection of the Daleks that is just beautiful, touching, delicate, and sensitive. In the ways that the story could not, it conveys her personality as being outwardly boisterous, but in reality, the thing that sums her up the most is a tender, gentle theme. One of the things that I always loved about Doctor Who was that its music was always fantastic. Its soundtrack was always at least ambitious, and most of the time it worked really well for the show. Some people disliked the shift more towards electronic music in the 80s. But honestly, I feel that some of it was just the best you could get. It was excellent. It was heartfelt. There was so much setting in that music. It would chill you. Musical stings would chill you. And then these delicate melodies, like that of Tegan, would reflect a poignance, a delicacy tendon, which I believe is one of the greatest parts of this serial and many others. It's certainly worth considering, and it's certainly worth paying respect to the very, very talented composers of the time. Tegan's departure was one of the saddest memories that I have of this particular story, and I remember the first time I saw it, which was in the 80s, I was very sad that it seemed as if it were the end of an era, which indeed it sort of was, because with Tegan's departure, then Turlough would be going the next story, and then the Fifth Doctor himself would be bowing out in the story just after that. It would mark the time when Saward would be entering his last stretch, and Nathan Turner would be facing a great deal of difficulty in the coming seasons after the indefinite hiatus Doctor Who was put on after season 22. Resurrection of the Daleks is a story that certainly could be an involving story that is interesting while it's going on, while you're thinking about it, while you're swept up in the action. Afterwards, it's not so good on retrospect. If you look at Frontios and Resurrection of the Daleks, which are basically just one story together, in much the same way as Planet of the Daleks connected with Frontier in Space, which Frontios. Coincidence? Frontios is obviously the good part of the story, whereas Resurrection of the Daleks is the part where it just sort of fizzles out gradually. It has a lot going on, so it keeps your mind active and you don't have time for fridge logic, as it's called, but it'll leave you feeling hollow and disappointed by the end. It's still worth watching though, and I'm going to put a link in the blurb so that you can check out the clip that the BBC have very graciously posted online of Tegan's departure, because if for no other reason than to see the good part of Resurrection of the Daleks. It's unfortunate that we had to say goodbye to Tegan, especially in a story that does not particularly use her well, but her departure was a very potent, very memorable moment. I hope to see you soon, depending on who enjoys this. Let me know if you did, and I'll see if I can't do more. See you again soon. You're welcome. Bye.